A single father walks into a luxury bank with nothing but lint in his pockets and an eviction notice burning against his ribs. His 3-year-old daughter sleeps on his shoulder, unaware that tomorrow they might be homeless. He slides a faded bank card across the marble counter, the last thing his dying wife ever gave him, and whispers 5 words that will change everything. I just want to see my balance. The millionaire bank manager laughs at his wrinkled shirt, his calloused hands, his desperation. But when that screen finally loads, her face goes white. The number staring back is impossible. $78 million. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this message has traveled. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but Miles Rayner was still soaked to the bone. He stood outside Sterling Crown Bank with his daughter Emma sleeping against his shoulder, her tiny fingers clutched around the collar of his work shirt, the same shirt he'd worn for 3 days straight because the laundromat cost $7 he didn't have. The building in front of him was all glass and steel, and the kind of cold elegance that made men like him feel invisible. He'd walked past it 100 times on his way to the construction site, never once imagining he'd step inside. But today was different. Today, he had $11 in his checking account, negative $43 in savings, and an eviction notice folded in his back pocket that gave him 72 hours to come up with $2,000 or lose the 1-bedroom apartment that was the only home Emma had ever known. He adjusted Emma's weight on his hip and pushed through the revolving door. The blast of air conditioning hit him like a slap. Inside, the bank was pristine, marble floors so polished he could see his reflection, chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, the faint scent of expensive cologne and fresh leather. A woman in a cream-colored suit glanced at him from across the lobby, her eyes flicking over his mud-stained jeans and worn boots before she looked away. Miles felt the familiar burn of shame crawl up his neck. He didn't belong here. But the card in his pocket, faded, scratched, the magnetic strip barely visible, had been burning a hole in his conscience for 6 months. His late wife Lena had pressed it into his palm the night before she died, her hand trembling, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you'll use this when you need it most." He hadn't understood what she meant. They'd never had money. They'd lived paycheck to paycheck, drowning in medical bills, rationing groceries, skipping meals so Emma could eat. He'd assumed the card was empty, just one more piece of his wife he couldn't let go of. But last night, sitting on the floor of their apartment with the eviction notice in one hand and Emma's baby blanket in the other, he'd finally decided to check, just to see, just to know. Miles walked toward the teller counter, his boots squeaking against the polished floor. A young woman with kind eyes and auburn hair pulled into a neat bun looked up from her computer screen and smiled. "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" Her voice was warm, professional, but Miles could see the way her gaze lingered on Emma, on the way his daughter's shoes were held together with duct tape, on the shadows under his eyes. He cleared his throat. I need to check the balance on this card." He slid it across the counter, his fingers trembling slightly. The teller, her name tag read Jenna, picked up the card and examined it, her brow furrowed. "This is an older card," she said carefully. "Do you have the account number?" "No, just the card." Jenna hesitated, then smiled again. "Let me see what I can find." She swiped the card through her reader. Nothing happened. She tried again. The screen blinked red. It's not reading. Let me try entering the number manually." Miles shifted Emma's weight, his heart pounding. Part of him wanted to leave, to walk out before the inevitable rejection, before Jenna told him the account was closed or empty or that he'd wasted his time. But he stayed. Jenna's fingers flew across her keyboard, her eyes narrowing as she studied the screen. Then her expression shifted. Confusion, then something else. Concern, maybe. Or surprise. "Mr. Rayner, Miles Rayner. Mr. Rayner, this account is flagged." Miles felt his stomach drop. "Flagged? What does that mean?" "It means I need to get a manager." Jenna's voice was still kind, but there was an edge of uncertainty now. "Can you wait here for just a moment?" Before he could respond, she stood and disappeared through a door behind the counter. Miles stood there, frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. Emma stirred against his shoulder, her small hand curling against his neck. "Daddy?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. It's okay, baby. We're just at the bank. I'm hungry. Miles closed his eyes. I know. We'll get something soon. A lie. He had $3 in his wallet and a quarter tank of gas in a car that was 2 weeks away from repossession. The door behind the counter opened again, and Jenna reappeared, this time with another woman. This one was different. She was tall, mid-40s, with sleek black hair pulled into a low ponytail and a navy suit that probably cost more than Miles made in a month. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes sharp, assessing. She looked at Miles the way a jeweler might look at a fake diamond. Mr. Rayner? Yes, ma'am. I'm Natalie Voss, Senior Account Manager. She extended a hand and Miles shook it, acutely aware of how rough his palm must feel against hers. Jenna tells me you're trying to access an account? Just checking a balance, Miles said quickly. That's all. Natalie's eyes flicked to Emma, then back to Miles. The account associated with this card is unusual. It requires clearance to access. Would you mind stepping into one of our private offices? Miles hesitated. I don't need anything private. I insist. Natalie's tone left no room for argument. She gestured toward a hallway to the right, and Miles, feeling like he'd just been summoned to the principal's office, followed. The hallway was quieter, lined with frosted glass doors. Natalie led him to the third one on the left and opened it, revealing a spacious office with leather chairs, a mahogany desk, and a view of the city skyline. Miles felt even more out of place. Please, sit. Natalie gestured to one of the chairs. Miles lowered himself into it carefully, adjusting Emma so she could curl against his chest. The little girl was awake now, her wide blue eyes, so much like her mother's, taking in the strange surroundings. Natalie sat across from him, her posture perfect, her hands folded on the desk. She inserted the card into a reader embedded in her computer and began typing. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft click of keys. Then Natalie's fingers stopped. Her expression didn't change, but Miles saw the subtle shift, the way her eyes widened just slightly, the way her lips parted. Is there a problem? Miles asked. Natalie didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her desk phone and pressed a button. Harold, can you come to my office immediately? She hung up before waiting for a response. Miles's heart was racing now. Ma'am, I don't understand. What's going on? Natalie looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time, and in her eyes, Miles saw something he didn't expect. Shock. Mr. Rayner, she said slowly, how long have you had this card? About 6 months. My wife gave it to me before she passed. Natalie's expression softened, just barely. I see. And you've never checked the balance? No, I didn't think. He trailed off. I didn't think there'd be anything on it. The door opened, and a man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses stepped inside. He wore a 3-piece suit and carried himself with the kind of authority that came from decades of power. Natalie? Harold, this is Miles Rayner. He's here to access account number. She glanced at her screen. 7794-3821. Harold's eyebrows shot up. That account? Yes. Harold crossed the room in 3 strides and leaned over Natalie's shoulder, staring at the screen. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Harold straightened and looked at Miles with an expression that was equal parts disbelief and something close to reverence. Mr. Rayner, do you have any idea what's in this account? Miles swallowed hard. No, sir. Harold exchanged a glance with Natalie, then turned the computer monitor so Miles could see it. At first, Miles didn't understand what he was looking at. Just numbers. A balance. Then his brain caught up. $78,423,650. The room tilted. Miles felt his breath catch, his vision narrowing to that single number on the screen. His hands tightened around Emma, and she let out a small noise of protest. Daddy? He couldn't speak. $78 million. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. Mr. Rayner. Natalie's voice sounded distant, like she was underwater. Are you all right? Miles shook his head slowly, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. There's been a mistake. There's no mistake, Harold said gently. This account is registered to you. It was opened 6 years ago under a private medical trust, with deposits made incrementally over time. The final deposit was made. He glanced at the screen. 6 months ago. 6 months. Right when Lena died. Miles felt something crack open inside his chest. His voice broke. I don't understand. Natalie and Harold exchanged another glance, and this time Natalie's expression softened completely. Mr. Rayner, she said quietly, I think there's something you need to know about your wife. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Harold left and returned with a thick file folder which he set on the desk between them. Inside were documents, medical records, legal contracts, letters written in Lena's handwriting. Miles couldn't process most of it. The words blurred together, his hands shaking as he turned page after page. But the story emerged slowly, like light breaking through fog. 7 years ago, when Emma was just a baby and Lena was still healthy, before the cancer, before the endless hospital visits, before everything fell apart, she'd received a call from a private medical foundation. A child was dying. A little boy, 8 years old, with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He needed a bone marrow transplant, and Lena was a match. She'd said yes immediately. The surgery was successful. The boy survived. And his family, a family with wealth Miles couldn't even fathom, had wanted to thank her. Lena refused money. She refused gifts. She refused everything except one request, that if anything ever happened to her, the foundation would make sure her family was taken care of. The family agreed. They set up a trust, a private account, untouchable, designed to grow over time. When Lena was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 3 years later, the family increased the deposits, and when she died, they transferred the full amount, every penny, to Miles. She didn't tell you, Harold said softly, because she didn't want you to feel indebted. She didn't want you to think of her sacrifice as transactional. Miles stared at Lena's signature on the bottom of one of the contracts, his vision blurring with tears. She saved a child, he whispered, and she never told me. Natalie leaned forward, her voice gentle. She didn't leave this money because you earned it, Mr. Rayner. She left it because she loved you. Miles broke. The sob tore out of him before he could stop it, raw and guttural, and Emma, sweet, confused Emma, wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on tight. It's okay, Daddy, she whispered. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. It would never be okay. Because Lena was gone, and no amount of money could bring her back. When Miles finally composed himself, Harold gently walked him through the next steps. There were documents to sign, accounts to set up, legal matters to address, but Harold assured him that none of it needed to happen today. Take your time, Harold said. This is yours. No one can take it from you. Natalie, who had been silent for most of the explanation, stood and walked around the desk. She knelt beside Miles's chair, her polished exterior cracking just enough for him to see the humanity underneath. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For earlier. For assuming... It's fine, Miles said, though his voice was hoarse. It's not. Natalie's eyes were bright. You walked in here looking for help, and I judged you. I'm sorry. Miles didn't have the energy to tell her it was okay, that he was used to it, that people had been looking at him like that for months. Instead, he just nodded. Natalie stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're going to be all right, Mr. Rayner. You and Emma, both. By the time Miles left the bank, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He carried Emma on his hip, her head resting against his shoulder, and in his other hand he clutched a folder containing temporary account information and a new debit card. He didn't feel rich. He felt hollow. But as he stepped onto the sidewalk and looked up at the sky, he felt something else, too. For the first time in 6 months, the weight pressing down on his chest had lifted. Just a little. Just enough to breathe. He kissed the top of Emma's head and whispered, Thank you, Lena. I won't let you down. And for the first time in a long time, Miles Rayner believed it. Miles didn't go home right away. He couldn't. Not yet. The weight of what had just happened pressed against his chest like a physical thing, and he needed time to process it. Time to understand that his entire world had shifted in the span of 30 minutes. Instead, he found himself sitting on a bench 2 blocks from the bank, Emma perched on his lap, watching the evening traffic roll by. The folder from the bank sat beside him, its contents too surreal to fully comprehend. Inside was a temporary debit card, paperwork explaining trust accounts and investment portfolios, and a business card for Harold Mason with a handwritten note on the back. "Call me tomorrow. We'll make sure everything is set up properly." Miles stared at the card in his hand, not the faded one Lena had given him, but the new one, crisp and unbent, with his name embossed across the front. Miles J. Rayner. It looked like it belonged to someone else. Someone who hadn't spent the last 6 months choosing between electricity and groceries. Someone who hadn't stood in line at food banks with his daughter, pretending it was an adventure so she wouldn't see his shame. "Daddy, I'm really hungry now," Emma said, tugging on his sleeve. Her voice was small, patient in the way only children who've learned to wait can be. Miles looked down at her tangled blonde curls, at the grass stain on her pink shirt, at the gap where her front tooth was just starting to come in. She looked up at him with those wide blue eyes, so trusting, so certain that he would take care of her. And for the first time in months, he could. "You want McDonald's?" he asked. Emma's face lit up like he'd just offered her the moon. "Really? With fries?" "With fries, and a toy." She threw her arms around his neck, squealing, and Miles felt his throat tighten. Such a small thing, Happy Meals and chicken nuggets. But it had been so long since he could say yes without counting pennies, without calculating whether they could afford it. He stood, lifting Emma onto his shoulders, and walked toward the golden arches glowing 3 blocks away. Inside the McDonald's, the fluorescent lights were harsh and the floor was sticky, but Emma didn't care. She pressed her face against the glass display case, pointing at the toy options with the kind of serious deliberation usually reserved for major life decisions. "The purple unicorn or the race car?" she asked, looking up at Miles for guidance. "Whichever one you want, baby." "Both?" Miles felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time in what felt like years. "Yeah, both." When their number was called, Miles carried the tray to a booth by the window. Emma attacked her nuggets with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting all day, which Miles realized with a pang of guilt she had. He'd given her half a banana and some crackers for lunch because it was all they'd had. Miles unwrapped his own burger but couldn't eat. He just watched Emma, watched the way she hummed to herself between bites, the way she lined up her fries in order of size before eating them. Normal kid things. Things he'd been too stressed, too exhausted, too buried under the weight of survival to really notice. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Miles pulled it out, a cheap prepaid thing with a cracked screen, and saw a text from his landlord, Rick. "Tomorrow's the deadline. You got the money or not?" Miles stared at the message, his jaw tightening. Rick had been decent enough at first, giving him extensions when Lena died, understanding when Miles missed a month here and there. But patience had run out 3 months ago, and now the texts came daily, threatening, cold. Miles's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of him wanted to text back immediately, to tell Rick that yes, he had the money, that he could pay the full $2,000 plus the late fees and the money he owed for utilities and everything else. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the knowledge that this money, this impossible life-altering amount of money, wasn't really his, not in the way he understood ownership. It was Lena's, her sex sacrifice, her legacy. And he needed to be careful with it, thoughtful, because if he screwed this up, if he wasted it, or lost it, or somehow proved unworthy of the gift she'd given him. "Daddy, you okay?" Miles blinked and looked up. Emma was watching him with concern, a French fry forgotten in her hand. He forced a smile. "Yeah, baby, I'm okay." "You look sad." "Just thinking about Mommy." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. She'd grown up hearing about Mommy, even though her memories of Lena were mostly fragments, a laugh, a smell, the feeling of being held. Miles talked about her every day, determined that Emma would know who her mother was, what she'd meant. how much she'd loved them both. "Mommy's watching us," Emma said matter-of-factly, returning to her fries. "From heaven." "Yeah," Miles whispered. "She is." He typed out a response to Rick. "I'll have it tomorrow." Then he turned off his phone before Rick could respond. They stayed at McDonald's until Emma had eaten every last fry and extracted both toys from their plastic packaging. By the time they left, the sky had gone fully dark, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. Miles carried Emma to the bus stop. His car had run out of gas that morning, and he hadn't had money to refill it. And they waited on the bench, Emma's head heavy against his shoulder. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" "Are we still going to lose our house?" Miles's breath caught. He'd tried so hard to shield her from the worst of it, to keep his panic and fear locked behind closed doors. But kids notice things. They heard the late-night phone calls, the whispered arguments with landlords, the way their father's hand shook when he opened the mailbox. "No," Miles said firmly. "We're not losing our house." "Promise?" "Promise." Emma sighed, a small sound of relief, and burrowed closer against him. Within minutes, she was asleep. Miles held her as the bus arrived, as they rode through the darkened streets toward their neighborhood, as the world outside the window blurred into smears of light and shadow. And he thought about Lena. He thought about the day they'd met, both of them 19, working minimum wage jobs, laughing over burnt coffee at a diner. He thought about their wedding in the courthouse, just the two of them and a judge, because they couldn't afford anything else. He thought about the day Emma was born, the way Lena had looked at their daughter with so much love it had seemed impossible that one person could contain it all. And he thought about the hospital room at the end, the machines beeping, Lena's hand cold in his, her voice barely a whisper. "You're going to be okay, both of you. I can't do this without you." "Yes, you can. You're stronger than you think." She'd pressed the card into his palm then, her fingers trembling. "When you need it most," she'd said. "Promise me." He'd promised, and then she was gone. Miles closed his eyes against the sting of tears and held Emma tighter. The bus stopped 3 blocks from their apartment, and Miles walked the rest of the way with Emma in his arms. The building was old, the paint peeling, the stairs creaking under his weight. But it was theirs, or at least it had been. Inside, the apartment was dark and cold. Miles had turned off the heat 2 weeks ago to save money. He laid Emma on the couch, covering her with a blanket, and then stood in the middle of the living room, looking around. The space was small, a living room that bled into a kitchenette, one bedroom that Emma slept in, a bathroom with a leaky faucet Miles didn't have the tools to fix. The walls were bare except for a few photos of Lena, and the furniture was secondhand, mismatched, falling apart. But it was home. Miles pulled the eviction notice from his back pocket and stared at it. 3 days. 72 hours. That's how long he'd had. Now he had $78 million. The thought was so absurd he almost laughed. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside the couch, his back against the wall, and pulled out the folder from the bank. He read through the document slowly, carefully, trying to make sense of the legal jargon and the numbers that didn't feel real. There were instructions for accessing the account, explanations of how the trust was structured, details about tax implications and investment options. Harold had included a handwritten note clipped to the front. "Miles, I know this is overwhelming. Take your time. Come by the bank tomorrow when you're ready, and we'll walk through everything step by step. You don't have to make any decisions tonight. This money is yours. It's not a loan. It's not conditional. Your wife made sure of that. Get some rest." Harold Miles folded the note carefully and set it aside. Then he pulled out his phone and turned it back on. Immediately, 3 more texts from Rick appeared. "You better not be screwing with me. I've got people lined up for that unit. Noon tomorrow. Final warning." Miles typed out a response, his jaw set. "I'll be there at 10 with cash." Rick's response came back almost immediately. "Cash? What, you win the lottery?" Miles didn't reply. He set the phone down and looked at Emma, her small body curled under the blanket, her breathing soft and steady. She looked peaceful, safe. And Miles made a decision. He wasn't going to waste this. He wasn't going to squander what Lena had given them, but he also wasn't going to let the money change who he was. He'd been poor his entire life. He knew how to stretch a dollar, how to make things last, how to live without excess. That wouldn't change just because there were suddenly 8 figures in his bank account. What would change was Emma's future. She'd go to good schools. She'd have clothes that fit and toys that weren't broken and meals that didn't come from food banks. She'd have opportunities Miles never had. She'd have choices. And maybe, Miles would finally stop feeling like he was drowning. He stood and walked to the small table by the window where Lena's photo sat in a simple frame. She was smiling in the picture, her hair pulled back, her eyes bright. It had been taken the week before her diagnosis, back when the world still made sense. Miles touched the glass gently. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. "I don't know how to be the person you thought I could be." The photo didn't answer, but Miles felt something shift inside him anyway. A loosening, a lightness. "But I'll try," he said. "For Emma, for you." He kissed his fingers and pressed them to the photo, then turned and walked to the couch. He lay down on the floor beside Emma, one hand resting on the cushion near her, and closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 months, Miles Rayner fell asleep without the crushing weight of panic pressing down on his chest. When morning came, Miles woke to find Emma sitting on the floor beside him, her toys spread out in a semicircle. Her voice soft as she narrated some elaborate game involving the purple unicorn and the race car from McDonald's. Sunlight streamed through the window, warm and golden, and for a moment Miles just lay there, listening to his daughter play, feeling the strange and unfamiliar sensation of peace. Then Emma noticed he was awake and grinned at him. "Morning, Daddy." "Morning, baby. Can we have pancakes?" Miles sat up, running a hand through his hair. They didn't have pancake mix. They didn't have much of anything. But today, he could fix that. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going out for breakfast." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" She scrambled to her feet and ran to the bedroom, and Miles stood, stretching the stiffness from his back. He grabbed his phone and saw another text from Rick. 10 o'clock. Don't be late. Miles checked the time. It was 7:30. He had time. He found Emma in the bedroom, struggling to pull on a pair of leggings that were too small. Her shirts were stained, her socks mismatched, and Miles felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over him. How long had it been since he'd bought her new clothes? How long since she'd had something that actually fit? "Come here," he said gently, kneeling in front of her. He helped her into the leggings and pulled a shirt over her head, then tied her shoes, worn sneakers with the soles starting to separate. "We'll get you new clothes today," he said. Emma looked at him skeptically. "You said that last time." "I know, but this time I mean it." She studied his face as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth, then nodded. "Okay." They left the apartment hand in hand, walking down the creaking stairs and out into the bright morning. Miles didn't take the bus this time. Instead, he walked to the gas station 2 blocks away, filled up a gas can with $20 from his wallet, money he'd been saving for the electric bill, and carried it back to where his car was parked. The car was a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a dented bumper and a broken passenger side mirror. The check engine light had been on for 6 months, and the air conditioning didn't work. But it ran, and that was enough. Miles poured the gas into the tank, tossed the can in the trunk, and buckled Emma into the back seat. "Where are we going?" she asked as he pulled out of the parking lot. "Breakfast first, then we've got some errands to run." "What kind of errands?" Miles glanced at her in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Good ones." They ended up at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus and a waitress who called everyone "hon." Miles ordered pancakes for Emma and coffee for himself, even though his stomach was too twisted with nerves to eat. Emma devoured her pancakes, getting syrup all over her face and hands, and Miles watched her with a mixture of love and heartbreak. This was what normal was supposed to look like. A kid eating breakfast without worry, without hunger, without the shadow of eviction hanging over her head. He'd forgotten what normal felt like. When the check came, Miles paid with cash, leaving a generous tip, and they left the diner just after 9. "Now what?" Emma asked as they got back in the car. "Now we go see Rick." "Who's Rick?" "The landlord." Emma's face fell. "Are we in trouble?" "No, baby, we're not in trouble." Miles drove to the property management office downtown, a squat building with bars on the windows and a flickering neon sign that read Rayner Properties in faded red letters. Rick's office was on the second floor, accessed by a narrow staircase that smelled like cigarettes and mildew. Rick was sitting behind a desk covered in paperwork when Miles walked in, Emma's hand clutched in his. Rick was a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and a perpetual scowl. He looked up when they entered, his expression souring. "You're early." "Figured I'd get it over with," Miles said evenly. Rick leaned back in his chair, eyeing Miles with suspicion. "You got the money?" "All of it." Rick's eyebrows shot up. "Cash?" Miles reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was $2,000 in crisp bills, withdrawn from an ATM that morning using the new debit card. He'd felt like a criminal standing there, punching in his PIN, watching the machine count out $100 bills like it was nothing. He placed the envelope on Rick's desk. Rick picked it up, opened it, and flipped through the bills slowly, counting under his breath. When he finished, he looked up at Miles with something between surprise and annoyance. "Where the hell did you get this kind of cash?" "Does it matter?" Rick's eyes narrowed. "You didn't do anything illegal, did you? Because if you did—" "It's clean," Miles said firmly. "Family money." It wasn't technically a lie. Rick grunted, clearly unsatisfied but unable to argue. He pulled out a receipt book and scribbled something down, then tore off a copy and handed it to Miles. "Rent's paid through the end of the month. You're caught up on utilities, too. But you're still on thin ice, Rayner. One more late payment and—" "There won't be any more late payments," Miles interrupted. Rick stared at him, as if trying to determine whether he was bluffing. Then he shrugged. "We'll see." Miles took the receipt, folded it carefully, and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he paused and looked back. "Actually, Rick, I've been thinking. What would it take to buy the building?" Rick blinked. "What?" "The apartment building. What would it take to buy it?" Rick let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're kidding, right?" "I'm not." Rick's laughter died. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from amusement to something closer to curiosity. "That building's worth $300,000, easy. You got that kind of money lying around?" Miles didn't answer, but the look on his face must have said enough because Rick's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I am." Rick sat back, rubbing his jaw. "I'd have to talk to the owner. It's not my call. But if you're serious, hell, I'll make some calls." Miles nodded. "Let me know." He left the office with Emma, his heart pounding. He hadn't planned to say that. It had just come out. A sudden impulse driven by the memory of every condescending look, every threatening text, every moment of powerlessness he'd felt over the past 6 months. But now that he'd said it, the idea took root. Why not buy the building? Why not own the place that had almost taken everything from him? Emma tugged on his hand as they descended the stairs. "Daddy, what did you mean? Are we buying a building?" Miles looked down at her and smiled. "Maybe. We'll see." "That sounds big." "It is big, baby. Real big." They spent the rest of the morning at Target, and Miles let Emma pick out new clothes, shirts and leggings and dresses and shoes that actually fit. He bought groceries, filling the cart with things they'd gone without for months. Fresh fruit, real milk, meat that wasn't frozen or processed. He bought cleaning supplies and light bulbs and a new blanket for Emma's bed. At the checkout, the total came to $437, and when Miles swiped the debit card without hesitation, the cashier smiled and wished them a good day. Emma fell asleep in the back seat on the drive home, surrounded by shopping bags, her new purple unicorn clutched in her arms. Miles carried her upstairs, bags dangling from both arms, and laid her on the couch. Then he unpacked everything, filling the refrigerator and cabinets, folding the new clothes and putting them in Emma's dresser. When he was finished, he stood in the middle of the apartment and looked around. It was still small, still old, still imperfect, but it didn't feel hopeless anymore. His phone buzzed. A text from Harold Mason. "Hope you got some rest. Come by the bank this afternoon if you can. There's more we need to discuss." Miles stared at the message, then typed back, "I'll be there at 2." He looked at Emma, still sleeping peacefully on the couch, and felt something settle inside him. This was real. This was happening, and somehow, impossibly, they were going to be okay. Miles arranged for their neighbor Mrs. Chen to watch Emma that afternoon. The elderly woman had helped him out a few times before, never asking for payment, even though Miles knew she could use it. This time, he pressed $200 into her weathered hand before she could protest. "Mr. Miles, this is too much," she said, trying to push the money back. "It's not enough," Miles replied quietly, "for everything you've done. Please." Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled him into a tight embrace that smelled like jasmine and old books. "You are a good man," she whispered. "Your wife, she knew." Miles's throat tightened, but he managed a nod before kissing Emma goodbye and heading back out to his car. The drive to Sterling Crown Bank felt different in daylight. The building still gleamed with that cold elegance, but Miles didn't feel quite so small approaching it this time. He parked in the visitor lot, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, still wearing the same work shirt, still looking tired, but somehow standing a little straighter, and walked through the glass doors. Jenna spotted him immediately from behind the counter and smiled. "Mr. Rayner, Mr. Mason is expecting you. I'll let him know you're here." She picked up the phone, spoke briefly, then gestured toward the same hallway he'd walked down yesterday. "Third door on the right. He's ready for you." Miles found the office easily. The door was open, and Harold Mason sat at his desk reviewing documents, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. He looked up when Miles knocked, and his entire demeanor shifted, professional veneer melting into something warmer. "Miles, come in, please. Close the door." Miles did as instructed and took the same leather chair he'd occupied the day before. The office looked different now, less intimidating. Or maybe Miles was just different. Harold set his papers aside and folded his hands on the desk. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure yet," Miles admitted. "It doesn't feel real." "That's understandable. These kinds of windfalls, especially ones tied to such profound loss, they take time to process." Harold's expression gentled. "I want you to know that everything we do moving forward is at your pace. There's no rush, no pressure." "Thank you." Harold nodded, then pulled a leather portfolio from his drawer and opened it. "I spent this morning reviewing your account in detail and consulting with our estate and trust attorneys. There are some things you need to understand about how this money is structured and what your options are." Miles leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped between his knees. "The account is held in a revocable living trust," Harold continued. "Your wife was the grantor, and you're the primary beneficiary. What that means in practical terms is that the money is yours, completely, legally, irrevocably yours. No one can contest it, no one can claim it, and there are no conditions attached to how you use it." "None?" "None. Your wife made that explicitly clear in the trust documents." Harold pulled out a letter, and Miles recognized Lena's handwriting immediately. His heart clenched. "She left this for you. The foundation gave it to me to hold until you access the account." Harold slid the letter across the desk, and Miles stared at it, his hands trembling as he picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Lena would never have bought for herself. His name was written across the front in her careful script. "Would you like privacy?" Harold asked gently. Miles shook his head. "I need to know what it says, but I don't think I can read it right now." Harold nodded in understanding. "I can summarize what's relevant to our discussion today, and you can read the personal parts when you're ready." "Please." Harold put on his reading glasses and opened the letter carefully. She starts by explaining the donation, the bone marrow transplant that saved the Westbrook child. Westbrook? The name meant nothing to Miles. Jonathan and Patricia Westbrook. He's a venture capitalist. She's a philanthropist. Their son Marcus was 8 when he was diagnosed with leukemia. Your wife's donation saved his life." Harold looked up. "The Westbrooks wanted to compensate her immediately, but she refused everything except one request, that they take care of her family if anything happened to her." Miles felt his chest tighten. Harold continued reading. She writes, "I know Miles will feel guilty about this money. He'll think he doesn't deserve it, that he hasn't earned it, but that's not what this is about. He spent his entire life taking care of everyone else. His mother when she was sick, his younger sister when their father left, and then me and Emma. He's never asked for anything. He's never expected anything. And I need him to know that this gift isn't about worthiness. It's about love. It's about making sure that when I'm gone, he and Emma have every opportunity I couldn't give them." Miles pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to hold back the tears. Harold's voice was thick with emotion as he continued. Tell him it's okay to use it. Tell him it's okay to breathe. Tell him I'm not watching from heaven keeping score. I just want him happy. I want Emma happy. That's all I ever wanted. The silence that followed was heavy and sacred. Finally, Miles lowered his hands and looked at Harold. She really wrote that. Every word. Harold set the letter down. And the Westbrooks honored her wishes completely. They structured the trust to grow over time, making strategic investments, building it into something that would sustain you and Emma for life. Can I meet them? The Westbrooks? Harold hesitated. They've expressed interest in meeting you, but they wanted me to emphasize that there's no obligation. They don't want you to feel indebted or pressured. If you choose to reach out, they'd welcome it. But if you need space, they understand. Miles nodded slowly. I think I'd like to meet them. Eventually. When I've figured out how to say thank you for something like this. Whenever you're ready, I'll arrange it. Harold pulled out another document, this one dense with financial terminology and charts. Now let's talk about the practical side. $78 million is a significant amount of money, but it's not infinite. With smart management, though, it can provide for you and Emma indefinitely. For the next hour, Harold walked Miles through the basics. They discussed investment strategies, the importance of diversification, the tax implications of large withdrawals. Harold explained that the trust was already invested in a mix of stocks, bonds, and real estate, generating roughly $3 million per year in returns. That's more than enough to live on comfortably without ever touching the principal, Harold said. But I want to be clear. This is your money. If you want to buy a house, start a business, donate to charity, or do anything else, that's your choice. I'm here to advise, not to dictate. Miles absorbed the information slowly, his mind struggling to grasp numbers that had once seemed impossibly abstract. $3 million a year in returns alone. He'd never made more than $35,000 in his best year. I want to set up something for Emma, Miles said. A college fund. Something she can't touch until she's 18. That's just for her education. Smart thinking. We can establish a 529 plan that will grow tax-free until she needs it. And I want to keep most of the rest invested. I don't need much to live on. Harold smiled. That's admirable, but don't shortchange yourself, Miles. You've been surviving. Now you get to live. I don't know how to do that. You'll learn. Harold leaned back in his chair. Start small. What's something you've wanted but couldn't afford? Miles thought about it. A reliable car. One that doesn't break down every other week. Then buy a reliable car. Nothing extravagant, just something dependable that won't leave you stranded. That feels like too much. Miles. Harold's voice was firm but kind. You've been living in crisis mode for months, maybe years. Your brain has been wired to see every expense as a potential catastrophe. But that's not your reality anymore. A safe, reliable vehicle isn't extravagant. It's practical. It's taking care of yourself so you can take care of Emma. Miles felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the vice that had been squeezing his chest for so long. Okay, he said quietly. A car. Good. What else? I want to help people. People like me who are struggling. Harold's expression warmed. How? I don't know yet, but I've stood in food bank lines. I've chosen between heat and medicine. I've known what it's like to feel invisible, like the world doesn't see you or care if you disappear. I want to do something about that. Harold was quiet for a moment, studying Miles with an expression that might have been respect. Your wife was right about you. What do you mean? In her letter, she said you were the kindest man she'd ever known. That even when you had nothing, you'd give away your last dollar if someone else needed it more. Harold smiled. I think philanthropy is in your future, Miles. But for now, let's focus on stabilizing your immediate situation. Once you have your feet under you, we can talk about how to make a broader impact. They spent another 30 minutes going over paperwork, signature pages, beneficiary forms, authorization documents. Miles's hand cramped from signing his name so many times, but Harold was patient, explaining each form before Miles put pen to paper. Finally, Harold pulled out a checkbook and a secondary debit card. I'm issuing you a checking account linked to the trust. I'm putting $50,000 in it to start. That should be more than enough for immediate expenses. The debit card has a daily limit of $5,000, which we can adjust if needed. $50,000. In a checking account, for immediate expenses. Miles felt dizzy. If you need more, just call me, Harold continued, but I'd advise against making any major purchases or decisions for at least a month. Give yourself time to adjust, to think, to process. This money isn't going anywhere. Thank you, Miles managed. For everything. It's my job, but it's also my pleasure. Harold stood and extended his hand. You're going to be okay, Miles. You and Emma, both. Miles shook his hand, gripping it firmly, trying to convey gratitude that words couldn't capture. As he turned to leave, Harold called after him. Miles, one more thing. Miles paused in the doorway. Your wife's letter, the full version. It's yours to keep. Take it home. Read it when you're ready. But know that she was very clear about one thing. She didn't want you to spend your life mourning her. She wanted you to live. Miles nodded, his throat too tight to speak, and walked out of the office. He made it to his car before the tears came. Great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, from a place he'd kept locked and sealed for 6 months because he couldn't afford to break down, couldn't afford to grieve, couldn't afford to feel anything except the desperate need to survive one more day. But now, sitting in the parking lot with Lena's letter clutched against his chest, Miles finally let himself shatter. He cried for the years they'd lost, for the future they'd never have. He cried for the night she died, for the way her hand had gone cold in his, for the sound of the machine's flatlining. He cried for Emma, who'd never really know her mother, who'd grow up with stories and photographs, but not memories. And he cried for himself, for the loneliness, for the fear, for the crushing weight of trying to be two parents when he barely knew how to be one. When the tears finally subsided, Miles sat in the silence, feeling emptied out and somehow lighter. He pulled Lena's letter from his pocket and unfolded it with shaking hands. The first part was what Harold had summarized, the explanation of the donation, the arrangement with the Westbrooks, her wishes for the money. But the last page was different, personal, raw. My dearest Miles, it began, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for leaving you. I'm sorry for putting you through this. I'm sorry that our time was cut short, but I'm not sorry for loving you. I'm not sorry for Emma. I'm not sorry for the life we built together, even though it was too brief. I know you, Miles. I know you're blaming yourself right now, thinking you should have done more, been more, saved me somehow. But you gave me everything. You gave me safety when I felt lost. You gave me laughter when life was hard. You gave me a daughter more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. And now, even though I can't be there, I'm giving you something back, freedom. Freedom from worry, from struggle, from the constant fear that kept us both awake at night. I don't want you to be afraid anymore. Use this money, build a life. Give Emma everything we couldn't afford. Travel if you want to. Go back to school. Start that woodworking business you always talked about. Do whatever brings you joy. But most importantly, don't close yourself off. I know it hurts right now. I know you think you'll never love again, never laugh again, never feel whole again. But you will. And when you do, don't feel guilty. Don't think you're betraying me, because all I ever wanted was for you to be happy. Love Emma enough for both of us. Teach her to be brave, to be kind, to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Tell her about me, but don't make me into a saint. I was just a person who loved her family. And forgive yourself. For whatever you think you did wrong, for whatever you think you should have done differently, forgive yourself. You were perfect, Miles. You are perfect. I love you. I will always love you. Now go live. All my heart, Lena. Miles read it 3 times, committing every word to memory. Then he carefully folded it, placed it in the glove compartment, and started the car. By the time he picked Emma up from Mrs. Chen's apartment, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Emma ran to him the moment he walked through the door, wrapping her arms around his legs. "Daddy, Mrs. Chen taught me how to make dumplings." "She did?" "Well, I mostly watched, but I helped fold one. It looked like a little pillow." Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "She is very good helper. You have smart daughter." "I know. Miles said, picking Emma up. Thank you again, Mrs. Chen. Any time, Mr. Miles, any time. On the drive home, Emma chattered about her afternoon, the dumplings, the stories Mrs. Chen told about growing up in China, the cat that lived in the apartment next door. Miles listened, really listened, not distracted by worry or fear or the constant mental calculation of bills and balances. Daddy? Yeah, baby? You seem different today. Miles glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Different how? Happy different. Like you're not scared anymore. Out of the mouths of babes, Miles thought. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. Kids always did. I'm not scared anymore, he said honestly. Or at least, not as scared. Why not? How could he explain it in a way she'd understand? How could he tell her that her mother had saved them from beyond the grave, that they were going to be okay, that the future wasn't the dark and terrifying thing it had been yesterday? Because Mommy left us a gift, he said finally. A really big gift. And it means we don't have to worry about losing our home or not having enough food anymore. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. Is it magic? Miles smiled. Kind of, yeah. I knew Mommy was magic. When they got home, Miles made dinner, real dinner. Not ramen or canned soup, but chicken and vegetables and rice. Emma helped, standing on a chair at the counter, stirring the pot with exaggerated seriousness. After dinner, they played on the living room floor, building block towers and crashing them down, laughing at the chaos. Miles couldn't remember the last time he'd played with Emma like this, without exhaustion dragging at him, without the constant anxiety that he should be doing something more productive. At bedtime, Emma brushed her teeth and climbed into bed, her new purple unicorn clutched against her chest. Miles sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled the covers up to her chin. Story? She asked hopefully. Always. But instead of reading from one of their worn picture books, Miles started talking. He told Emma about the day he met her mother, about the burnt coffee, and the way Lena had laughed at his terrible jokes. He told her about their wedding, about dancing in the courthouse parking lot because they couldn't afford a reception. He told her about the day she was born, about how tiny she'd been, how perfect, how Lena had cried with joy. Emma listened with wide eyes, soaking up every detail like she was starving for it. Mommy loved me? She asked when Miles finished. More than anything in the world. And she loved you? Yes, baby, very much. Emma smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Emma, so much. He stayed there until her breathing evened out, until he was sure she was asleep, then stood and walked quietly to the living room. Miles pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in 3 years. His sister, Rachel. They'd had a falling out after Lena died. Stupid sibling stuff compounded by grief and stress. And Miles had been too proud, too angry, too buried in survival to reach out. But Lena's letter echoed in his mind. Don't close yourself off. He hit call before he could change his mind. Rachel answered on the third ring. Miles? Hey, Rach. There was a pause, and Miles could hear voices in the background, music playing. Is everything okay? Is Emma... Emma's fine. We're both fine. He took a breath. I wanted to call to say I'm sorry for shutting you out. Another pause, longer this time. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I'm sorry too. I should have tried harder. I should have been there. You tried. I pushed you away. Yeah, well, you were grieving. I should have understood that. They talked for an hour, catching up, apologizing, laughing over old memories. Rachel told him about her job, her apartment, her boyfriend who wanted to propose but was too nervous. Miles told her about Emma's new obsession with unicorns, about the eviction notice that had almost destroyed them, about the impossible miracle that had saved them. Wait, Rachel interrupted. You're telling me Lena left you $78 million? Technically, the family of the kid she saved left it to me. But yeah. Rachel was silent for so long that Miles thought the call had dropped. Then she whispered, That's the most Lena thing I've ever heard. Saving someone's life and not telling a soul. Yeah, Miles agreed, his voice rough. What are you going to do with it? I don't know yet. Make sure Emma's taken care of. Help people, maybe. Figure out how to live instead of just survive. That sounds like a good plan. You should come visit. Meet Emma properly. She barely remembers you. I'd like that, Rachel said. I'd really like that. When they finally hung up, Miles felt another piece of himself click back into place. The isolation he'd wrapped around himself like armor was starting to crack, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there, the Westbrooks were living their lives, their son healthy and whole because of Lena. Somewhere out there, other families were struggling the way Miles had struggled, choosing between impossible options, drowning in systems that didn't care. Miles thought about what Harold had said, about philanthropy being in his future. Maybe it was. Maybe he could take this impossible gift and turn it into something that mattered, something that would make Lena proud. But tonight, he was just a father who'd survived another day, a father who could finally breathe. He picked up Lena's photo from the table and held it close. "I'm going to be okay," he whispered. "We're going to be okay. I promise." And for the first time since she died, Miles actually believed it. The next morning brought a clarity Miles hadn't felt in years. He woke before Emma, made coffee in their tiny kitchen, and sat at the table with a notebook he'd found in a drawer. The pages were blank, waiting, and for once Miles didn't feel paralyzed by the emptiness. He started making lists, not the desperate kind he'd made before, scratching out bills he couldn't pay and needs he couldn't meet, but different lists, hopeful ones. Things Emma needs. Things we need for the apartment. Long-term plans. People to help. His pen hovered over that last one. People to help. The phrase felt enormous, weighted with possibility. He thought about Mrs. Chen, who'd helped him without asking for anything in return. He thought about the other families in their building, the ones he'd seen loading their belongings into cars in the middle of the night, evicted like he'd almost been. He thought about the food bank where he and Emma had stood in line, surrounded by people who looked just as tired, just as desperate, just as invisible as he'd felt. Emma padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Daddy." "Morning, sunshine." Miles closed the notebook and pulled her into his lap. "How'd you sleep?" "Good. I dreamed about Mommy." Miles's chest tightened. "Yeah? What happened in the dream?" "She was playing with me in a big garden with lots of flowers. She said she was happy." Emma looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. "Do you think she's really happy? In heaven?" Miles kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I think if heaven exists, she's there, and I think she's watching you grow up and feeling so proud." "Even when I spilled juice on the carpet?" Miles laughed, really laughed, and it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Even then." They spent the morning slowly, without the frantic rush that had defined their lives for months. Miles made pancakes from scratch, and Emma helped crack the eggs, getting shell fragments in the bowl that Miles fished out with a spoon. They ate at the table instead of standing over the sink. They talked about nothing important, cartoons and the neighbor's dog, and whether unicorns could fly or just had wings for decoration. It was ordinary, beautifully, perfectly ordinary. Around 10, Miles's phone rang. Harold Mason's name appeared on the screen. "Harold, good morning." "Miles, I hope I'm not calling too early. I have some news that couldn't wait." Miles straightened, his free hand unconsciously reaching for Emma. "What kind of news?" "The Westbrooks would like to meet you. Today, if possible. They're in town briefly. Jonathan has business meetings, and they asked if you'd be available for lunch." Miles's stomach flipped. "Today?" "I know it's sudden. If you need more time, no." Miles surprised himself with the firmness of his answer. "No, I'd like to meet them. I need to." "Excellent. I'll text you the address. It's a private club downtown, nothing too formal, but you might want to dress accordingly." After they hung up, Miles stood in the middle of the kitchen, his mind racing. He owned exactly 2 button-down shirts, both bought from Goodwill years ago. One had a stain on the collar that never quite came out. The other was wrinkled but clean. "Emma, we need to go shopping." 2 hours later, they stood in a department store Miles had never set foot in before. surrounded by racks of clothes that cost more than he'd made in a week at the construction site. A sales associate named Marcus approached with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when he took in Miles's worn jeans and work boots. "Can I help you find something?" Miles straightened his shoulders. "I need clothes for a business lunch. Something appropriate but not too formal." Marcus's expression shifted, professional courtesy replacing the initial judgment. "Of course. What's your budget?" Miles hesitated. What was his budget? Yesterday it would have been $50 maximum. Today he had $50,000 in his checking account and no idea what qualified as reasonable. "I don't know," he admitted. "What would you suggest?" Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me." 30 minutes later, Miles stood in front of a fitting room mirror, wearing dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a navy blazer that fit him better than anything he'd ever owned. He looked different. Not like someone pretending to be wealthy, but like someone who belonged in rooms where important conversations happened. "You look fancy, Daddy," Emma said from where she sat swinging her legs on a bench. "Too fancy?" "No, you look like a prince," Marcus smiled. "She's right. This works well on you. The fit is excellent. Would you like to see some shoe options?" By the time they left the store, Miles had spent $800 on clothes. Slacks, shirts, a second blazer, dress shoes, and even a tie he wasn't sure he'd ever wear. The old Miles would have been horrified. The new Miles was still adjusting to the idea that he could spend money without his world collapsing. They stopped for an early lunch at a sandwich shop, and Miles checked his phone. Harold had sent the address. The Sterling Club. One of those places Miles had walked past 100 times without ever imagining he'd go inside. His hands shook slightly as he typed out a response confirming he'd be there at 1. "Are you nervous?" Emma asked, watching him with that uncanny perception children have. "A little." "Why?" "Because I'm going to meet the people your mom saved, and I don't know what to say to them." Emma thought about this, taking a bite of her sandwich. "You could say thank you." "That doesn't feel like enough." "Then say thank you a lot." Miles smiled despite his nerves. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" "Mommy always said so." At 12:30, Miles dropped Emma back at Mrs. Chen's apartment with another apology for the imposition and another handful of bills that Mrs. Chen tried to refuse. Then he drove to the Sterling Club, his new clothes feeling strange against his skin, his heart hammering against his ribs. The building was understated elegance, red brick, brass fixtures, a doorman in a burgundy uniform who opened the door with a polite nod. Inside, the lobby was all dark wood and leather, oil paintings on the walls, the hushed quiet of money and influence. A hostess greeted him. "Good afternoon. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting the Westbrooks, Jonathan and Patricia Westbrook." Her expression shifted to something more deferential. "Of course, Mr. Rayner. They're expecting you. Right this way." She led him through a dining room where well-dressed men and women spoke in low voices over white tablecloths and crystal glasses. Miles felt eyes follow him, and he wasn't sure if it was curiosity or suspicion, maybe both. They stopped at a private room toward the back, and the hostess knocked softly before opening the door. "Mr. Rayner." Miles stepped inside and his breath caught. The couple sitting at the table looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. Jonathan Westbrook, tall and distinguished with silver-threaded hair and an expensive suit, Patricia elegant in a cream-colored dress, pearls at her throat. But it was the boy sitting between them who stopped Miles in his tracks. He was 15 now, gangly in the way teenage boys are, with dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for his face. He wore a school uniform, blazer, tie, the works, and he was staring at Miles with an expression Miles couldn't quite read. "Miles?" Jonathan stood immediately, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Miles shook his hand, feeling the firm grip, the calluses that spoke of someone who'd worked with his hands despite his wealth. "Thank you for inviting me." Patricia stood as well, and unlike her husband, she didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she pulled Miles into an embrace that was warm and fierce and completely unexpected. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for sharing her with us. Even just her memory." When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears, and Miles felt his own throat tighten. "This is Marcus," Jonathan said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. The boy stood awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable but trying to hide it. He extended his hand and Miles shook it gently. "Hi," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly on the single syllable. "Hi, Marcus." They all sat, and for a moment no one spoke. A waiter appeared with menus and water, his movements practiced and silent, and then they were alone again. Patricia was the one who finally broke the silence. "We've wanted to meet you for so long, but we didn't want to intrude on your grief. We didn't want to make you feel obligated. Harold said you've been incredibly generous." "It's not generosity," Jonathan said firmly. "Your wife saved our son's life. There's no amount of money that repays that." "She didn't do it for money." "We know." Patricia's voice was soft. "That's why we wanted to make sure you were taken care of. It's what she would have wanted." Marcus had been quiet, picking at his napkin, but now he looked up at Miles. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What was she like?" "Your wife?" Miles felt the familiar ache in his chest, but it was softer now, more like an old wound than a fresh cut. "She was kind. That's the first thing anyone who met her said. She couldn't walk past someone who needed help without stopping. She'd give away her lunch to a homeless person and tell me she wasn't hungry anyway." Marcus listened intently, leaning forward slightly. "She was funny, too, terrible at telling jokes, like truly awful, but she'd laugh at herself so hard that you couldn't help laughing with her. And she was stubborn. When she decided something was right, there was no talking her out of it." "Like donating bone marrow," Patricia said quietly. "Exactly like that. When she got the call that she was a match, I asked her if she was sure, if she'd thought it through. She looked at me like I was crazy, said there was a kid dying and she could help, so what was there to think about?" Jonathan's jaw tightened with emotion. "We told her we'd pay for everything, medical expenses, time off work, anything she needed. She refused it all, said we should donate to cancer research instead." "That sounds like her." Marcus spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I was 8 when I got sick. I don't remember a lot of it. They had me on so many drugs. But I remember being scared all the time. Scared I was going to die. Scared my parents were going to have to watch me die." Patricia reached over and squeezed her son's hand. "The day they told me they'd found a donor, I remember thinking it was a miracle. Like someone I'd never met decided my life was worth saving." Marcus's eyes met Miles's. "I think about that all the time, about how I get to be here, going to school and playing soccer and arguing with my parents about stupid stuff because she said yes when she didn't have to." Miles's vision blurred. "She would be so happy to know you're okay." "Did she ever talk about me? About the donation?" Miles shook his head. "Not once. I didn't even know about it until yesterday." Marcus looked stunned. "She never told you?" "She kept a lot of things to herself, things she probably should have shared. But that was Lena. She didn't do it for recognition or gratitude. She just did it because it was right." They ordered food, though Miles barely tasted what was placed in front of him. The conversation flowed more easily now, the initial awkwardness giving way to something warmer. Patricia asked about Emma, and Miles found himself pulling out his phone to show pictures. Emma at the park. Emma covered in paint from an art project. Emma asleep with her new unicorn. "She looks like her mother," Patricia said, studying the photos with a soft smile. "Everyone says that. Same eyes, same smile. Sometimes it's hard to look at her because I see Lena so clearly. But you're doing it alone. I don't have much choice." Jonathan leaned forward, his expression serious. "Miles, I want you to understand something. The money we put in that trust, it's not charity. It's not us trying to ease our guilt or buy absolution. It's us trying to honor a woman who gave us back our son when we'd almost lost hope. I understand that, and I'm grateful. More grateful than I can express." "But?" Miles hesitated. "But I don't know what to do with it. I've spent my whole life scraping by. I know how to survive on nothing. I don't know how to live with everything." Patricia exchanged a glance with her husband, and something passed between them, a silent communication that came from years of partnership. She turned back to Miles. "May I tell you something?" "Please." "When Marcus first got sick, we threw money at the problem. The best doctors, the best hospitals, experimental treatments that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and none of it worked. We were losing him anyway, and all that money meant nothing. Her voice cracked, and Jonathan reached for her hand. Then your wife saved him with a simple donation. No fancy technology, no expensive procedure. Just her willingness to help a stranger. And it made me realize that wealth without purpose is just numbers on a screen. What matters is what you do with it, how you use it to make the world less cruel. I want to do that, Miles said. I want to help people. I just don't know how. You'll figure it out, Jonathan said. And when you do, we'd like to help. We've established foundations before. Medical research, scholarship programs, things like that. If you want to do something similar, we can guide you through the process. Why would you do that? Because your wife gave us a gift we can never repay. Helping you honor her memory is the closest we can come. Marcus, who'd been quiet for several minutes, spoke up again. Mr. Rayner, can I show you something? Of course. The boy pulled out his phone and opened the Photos app. He scrolled through dozens of pictures, soccer games, school events, family vacations, and stopped on one that made Miles's chest tighten. It was Marcus in a hospital bed, thin and pale, tubes running from his arms, but smiling at the camera. Someone had written on his arm in marker, "Day of transplant." "Thank you, donor." "I keep this on my phone," Marcus said quietly, "to remind myself that someone I never met cared enough to save me. And I promised myself that when I grew up, I'd spend my life doing the same thing, helping people I don't know, just because it's right." Miles couldn't speak. He just nodded, blinking back tears. Patricia reached across the table and took his hand. "Lena's gift didn't just save Marcus. It shaped who he's becoming. That's her legacy, Miles. And now it's yours and Emma's too." They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from heavy topics to lighter ones. Marcus told stories about his school, about the soccer team he captained, about the college applications he was starting to think about. Jonathan shared business advice without being condescending, treating Miles like an equal rather than a project. Patricia asked thoughtful questions about Emma's interests, already planning ways to send books and toys that might spark her imagination. By the time Miles left the Sterling Club, the sun had shifted low in the sky, casting long shadows across the city. He sat in his car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to process everything that had happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Thank you for today. It meant more than you know. Please keep in touch. You're part of our family now, whether you like it or not." Miles smiled despite the tears running down his face. He typed back, "Thank you for honoring her, for remembering her, for giving me a chance to breathe." Her response came immediately. "She gave us everything. This is the least we can do." Miles drove back to Mrs. Chen's apartment in a daze. When he knocked on the door, Emma came running, launching herself into his arms. "How was it?" Mrs. Chen asked, reading something in his expression. "It was good, really good." That night, after Emma was asleep, Miles sat at the kitchen table with his notebook again. This time, he didn't hesitate over the blank pages. He started writing, plans, ideas, dreams that had seemed impossible yesterday but felt achingly real tonight. He would set up Emma's college fund first thing in the morning. He would buy that reliable car Harold had mentioned. He would pay off every medical bill, every debt, every penny that had been drowning him for years. And then he would figure out how to help. Maybe a foundation, like Jonathan suggested. Maybe something simpler, paying rent for families facing eviction, covering groceries for people choosing between food and medicine, creating scholarships for kids like Emma, who deserved opportunities their parents couldn't afford. He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, he had the resources to find them. Miles looked at Lena's photo on the table, her smile frozen in time, her eyes holding all the love and hope and stubborn determination that had defined her. "I'm going to make you proud," he whispered. "I'm going to take this gift and turn it into something that matters, something that would make you smile." The photo didn't answer, but Miles felt something settle inside him anyway, a sense of purpose, a direction. He'd spent 6 months drowning. He'd spent yesterday learning to breathe. Now it was time to learn how to swim. Miles closed the notebook and stood, exhaustion finally catching up with him. But it was a different kind of tired than before. Not the bone-deep weariness of defeat, but the satisfied fatigue of a day well spent. He checked on Emma one last time, adjusting her blanket and kissing her forehead. She stirred slightly, murmuring something about unicorns in her sleep, and Miles's heart swelled with a fierce, protective love. "We're gonna be okay, baby," he whispered. "Better than okay." In the living room, he picked up his phone and opened his messages. He scrolled through the contacts until he found Rachel's name and typed, "What are you doing next weekend?" "Emma and I want to come visit." Her response came within seconds. "Really?" "Oh my God, yes! I'll take Friday off work. We can go to the zoo, the children's museum, whatever Emma wants." Miles smiled. She'd love that. So would I. "Miles? Yeah? I'm really glad you called yesterday. I missed you." "I missed you too, Rach." He set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the Westbrooks were probably tucking Marcus into bed, grateful for another day with their son. Somewhere out there, families were struggling the way Miles had struggled, wondering how they'd make it through tomorrow. Miles pressed his palm against the cool glass and made a silent promise, to Lena, to Emma, to himself. He wouldn't waste this gift. He wouldn't squander the second chance she'd given him. He'd build something good from the ashes of his grief, something that would ripple outward and touch lives he'd never know. The way Lena's single act of kindness had saved not just Marcus but Miles himself. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be challenges, decisions, moments of doubt. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Miles wasn't afraid of what came next. He was ready. The following morning, Miles woke to sunlight streaming through the apartment windows and the sound of Emma singing to herself in the bedroom. For a moment he lay still, letting the warmth of the light wash over him, marveling at how different everything felt. The weight that had pressed against his chest for 6 months, the constant dread, the suffocating anxiety, had lifted, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. He found Emma in her room, already dressed in one of her new outfits, attempting to braid her own hair with more enthusiasm than skill. "Need help, sunshine?" She turned to him with a lopsided smile, half her hair sticking up at odd angles. "I wanted to look pretty for our big day." "Our big day?" "You said we're doing important things today, so I wanted to look important." Miles knelt beside her, gently untangling the mess she'd made and working her hair into 2 neat braids. "You always look important to me. But yes, we have some things to take care of." Their first stop was the bank. Harold had scheduled an early appointment, and when they arrived, Jenna greeted them with the same warm smile as before, but this time there was recognition in her eyes, not judgment, but genuine pleasure at seeing them. "Mr. Rayner, Emma, Mr. Mason is ready for you." Harold's office felt familiar now, less intimidating. He stood when they entered and immediately crouched down to Emma's level. "You must be Emma. Your dad has told me so much about you." Emma, typically shy around strangers, studied him seriously. "Are you the one helping my daddy?" "I'm trying to. Is that okay with you?" She nodded solemnly. "Daddy needs help sometimes. He tries to do everything by himself." Harold's eyes met Miles's over Emma's head, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or respect. "Well, I'm here to make sure he doesn't have to do everything alone anymore." They spent the next hour going through paperwork. Harold had prepared documents for Emma's college fund, a 529 plan that would grow over the years, ensuring she'd have every educational opportunity without the crushing weight of student debt. Miles signed the papers with shaking hands, thinking about how Lena had worked 2 jobs to pay for the single semester of community college she'd managed before they'd gotten pregnant with Emma. "This account is structured so Emma can't access it until she's ready for college," Harold explained. "But you can add to it whenever you want. We've seeded it with $2 million to start. $2 million for education." Miles had to sit with that number for a moment, letting it sink in. Emma, who was coloring at Harold's desk, had no idea that her entire future had just been secured with the stroke of a pen. "Now, let's talk about your immediate needs," Harold continued, pulling out another folder. "You mentioned wanting a reliable vehicle." "Nothing fancy. Just something that won't break down when Emma's in the car." I took the liberty of researching some options. Harold slid several printouts across the desk. "These are all certified pre-owned vehicles with excellent safety ratings and reliability scores. The prices range from $20,000 to $35,000. Miles studied the options: Hondas, Toyotas, one Subaru that had particularly good reviews. They all looked impossibly nice compared to his current car, which was probably one bad day away from dying completely. The Honda Pilot, Miles said, pointing to one of the middle options. It has good cargo space, and the safety rating is perfect. Excellent choice. I can have my assistant set up appointments at dealerships this afternoon if you'd like. That would be great, thank you. Harold made a note, then looked up at Miles with an expression that had grown more serious. I also wanted to discuss something else. You mentioned wanting to help people. Have you given any more thought to how you'd like to do that? Miles had thought about little else since leaving the Sterling Club yesterday. He'd lain awake last night, Lena's words echoing in his mind, Marcus's gratitude burning in his chest, his own memories of standing in food bank lines replaying like a film he couldn't turn off. I want to start a foundation, Miles said, something focused on preventing homelessness, helping families before they reach the breaking point. Harold nodded slowly. That's ambitious and important. What would that look like specifically? Emergency assistance for rent and utilities, help with medical bills that are about to bury someone, maybe a fund for people who need car repairs to get to work, or childcare so they don't lose their jobs. The things that seem small to people with money but are catastrophic when you don't have any. Emma looked up from her coloring. Like when our lights got turned off? Miles felt his throat tighten.
Yeah, baby. Like that. Harold was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes.
This is doable. The Westbrooks mentioned they'd be willing to consult, which would be invaluable. They've established several successful foundations. We'd need to set up a board, create guidelines for assistance, establish application processes. How long would that take? To do it properly. A few months, maybe longer. But Miles, there's nothing stopping you from helping people right now, today, while we work on the formal structure. You have the resources. You just need to decide how to deploy them. Miles sat back in his chair, the weight of possibilities settling over him. I could start small, pay some overdue rent for families in my building, cover electric bills for people who are about to lose power. Exactly. Start with what you know, with the community around you. The formal foundation can come later. They talked through the logistics, how to approach it without making people feel like charity cases, how to verify need without being invasive, how to handle the inevitable requests that would come once word got out. Harold suggested working with local churches and community organizations who already had relationships with struggling families, who could identify genuine need and maintain discretion. By the time they left the bank 2 hours later, Miles had a plan. Not a complete one, not a perfect one, but a starting point. And that was enough. The car dealership was overwhelming in its own way. Rows of shining vehicles, salespeople with bright smiles and firm handshakes, the smell of new leather and possibility. A man named Tony greeted them, and Miles could see the familiar assessment in his eyes, the subtle recalibration when he noticed Miles's new clothes but old watch, the way Emma clutched a worn stuffed animal. Looking for something specific today? Honda Pilot. Certified pre-owned, good safety rating, reliable. Tony's demeanor shifted slightly, not dismissive exactly, but preparing for a customer who'd probably just browse and leave. Let me show you what we have. They walked through the lot, Emma skipping ahead, pointing at colors she liked. Tony showed them 3 options, explaining features and mileage and maintenance records with practiced efficiency. Miles test drove the newest one, a silver Pilot with leather seats and a backup camera, and all the features he'd never thought he'd own. It drove smooth, quiet, safe. Emma sat in the back, running her hands over the clean upholstery, her eyes wide. It smells good, Daddy. It does, doesn't it? Back in the showroom, Tony pulled up the numbers. This one's listed at $32,000. With taxes and fees, you're looking at about $35,000 out the door. I'll take it. Tony blinked. Don't you want to negotiate? Look at financing options? I'm paying cash. The word hung in the air between them, and Miles watched Tony's expression cycle through surprise, skepticism, and finally a kind of eager professionalism. Cash. Okay, let me get the paperwork started. An hour later, Miles drove out of the dealership in a car that was his, fully paid, no monthly payments hanging over his head like a sword. Emma was in the back seat, properly secured in a brand new car seat the dealership had installed, chattering about all the places they could drive now. "Can we go to the beach? It's December, baby. It'll be cold." "But we could see it, right? I've never seen the ocean." Miles caught her eye in the rearview mirror, saw the hopeful expression on her face, and felt something crack open in his chest. How many times had he told her someday about things like this? How many small dreams had he deferred because of gas money and time and the constant grinding need to just survive? "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, we can go see the ocean, maybe this weekend." Emma's squeal of delight was so pure, so unrestrained, that Miles had to blink back tears. They stopped at the grocery store on the way home, and Miles let Emma pick out whatever she wanted. Fruits that weren't on sale, the good brand of mac and cheese, cookies and juice boxes, and all the things he'd been saying no to for months. The cart filled up, and for once Miles didn't calculate the total in his head, didn't put things back, didn't feel the familiar dread at the register. The total came to $247, and Miles swiped his card without flinching. "Somebody had a good shopping day," the cashier said, smiling at Emma, who was clutching a box of animal crackers like treasure. "We're celebrating," Emma announced. "We have a new car and we're going to see the ocean, and Daddy's not scared anymore." The cashier's smile softened, and she looked at Miles with something like understanding. "Sounds like good times ahead." "Yeah," Miles said. "I think they are." Back at the apartment, Miles and Emma unloaded the groceries together, filling the cabinets and refrigerator until they actually looked full for the first time in memory. Emma organized the snacks in her special drawer, humming to herself, and Miles stood in the kitchen doorway just watching her, memorizing this moment. His phone buzzed. A text from Rick, the landlord. "Got someone interested in buying the building. Making an offer this week. Thought you'd want to know since you mentioned it." Miles stared at the message, his mind working. He'd thrown out the idea of buying the building half in anger, half in defiance. But now, thinking about it seriously, it made sense. He knew every family in the building, knew their struggles. If he owned it, he could keep rents reasonable, could work with people when they fell behind instead of immediately threatening eviction. He typed back, "I'm still interested. What's the asking price?" Rick's response came quickly. "Owner wants $320K. Building needs work, but the location's solid." Miles thought about it for exactly 30 seconds, then called Harold. "Miles, is everything okay?" "The building I live in is for sale. I want to buy it." There was a pause. "Your apartment building?" "Yes. I know everyone here. I know what they need, and I can make sure families don't get thrown out when they hit a rough patch." Harold was quiet for a moment, and Miles could almost hear him thinking. That's not a typical investment property approach. "I don't care about typical." "No, I suppose you don't." Harold's voice warmed. "Send me the details. I'll have someone inspect it, make sure there aren't any serious structural issues. If it checks out, we can make an offer." "Thank you." "Miles, this is good. What you're doing, starting small, helping your own community first, this is exactly right." After they hung up, Miles walked to the window and looked out at the building across the street, at the laundromat on the corner where he'd spent countless hours, at the bodega where the owner had let him run a tab when things got really bad. This was his neighborhood, his community. These were his people. If he was going to make a difference, this was the place to start. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Miles sat down with his notebook again. He made a list of every family in the building. Everyone he knew was struggling. The Johnsons in 2B, where the dad had lost his job 3 months ago. Mrs. Martinez in 3A, a widow trying to raise her grandson on Social Security. The young couple in 1C with a newborn and medical bills they couldn't pay. Then he made another list, the monthly expenses that would crush him a week ago but meant nothing now. Rent, utilities, car insurance, medical copays. By the time he finished, he had a plan. The next morning, Miles knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. She answered in her bathrobe, clearly surprised by the early visit. "Mr. Miles, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Can I come in for a minute?" She led him into her small apartment, which smelled like ginger and tea. Miles pulled an envelope from his pocket, cash $5,000, and placed it on her table. What is this? It's a thank you. For all the times you've helped me with Emma, for the food you've shared, for being kind when I had nothing to give back. Mrs. Chen stared at the envelope, then at Miles, her eyes filling with tears. This is too much. It's not enough. But it's a start. Miles covered her weathered hand with his. I know your son sends money, but I know it's not always enough. I know you've been skipping your heart medication sometimes because you can't afford it. I know you need a new water heater and you've been making do with cold showers. How did you know it? Because I've been there. I've been where you are right now, choosing between medicine and food, between fixing things and paying rent. And someone I never even met, gave me a gift that changed everything. So I'm passing it forward. Mrs. Chen broke down crying, and Miles held her while she sobbed against his shoulder. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she looked at him with something like awe. Your wife, she would be very proud. I hope so. He repeated the scene 5 more times that day. The Johnsons, who broke down when he handed them 3 months of rent in cash and told them to take their time finding work, that he'd bought their building and there would be no more eviction notices. Mrs. Martinez, who kissed his hands and called him an angel. The young couple with the newborn, who couldn't stop thanking him through their tears when he paid off their medical bills. By the end of the day, Miles had given away nearly $40,000, and it was the best money he'd ever spent. Word spread fast in the building. By that evening, people were knocking on Miles's door, some to thank him, some to ask if the rumors were true, some just to look at him like he'd grown wings. One man, a construction worker Miles recognized from the site where he used to work, caught him in the stairwell. Heard you came into some money. Miles tensed, waiting for the request, the assumption, the outstretched hand. Instead, the man stuck out his hand to shake. Just wanted to say congratulations, man, and thank you for what you did for the Johnsons. That's my cousin. You probably saved their marriage. Miles shook his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength of someone who worked with his body. I just did what I could. More than most would. You're a good man, Rainer. That weekend, Miles kept his promise. They drove to the coast in their new car, Emma's excited chatter filling the space, the radio playing songs she sang along to, even though she didn't know all the words. The drive took 2 hours, and Miles marveled at how smooth the car ran, how safe it felt, how Emma could look out the window without worry. When they finally saw the ocean, Emma went silent. They parked and walked down to the beach, and Miles lifted her onto his shoulders so she could see better. The waves crashed against the shore, endless and powerful, and Emma gripped his hair, her breath catching. It's so big, Daddy. Yeah, baby, it is. Does it go on forever? Pretty close. They walked along the beach, Emma running ahead to chase seagulls, her laughter carried away by the wind. Miles took pictures on his phone. Emma with her arms spread wide. Emma jumping over waves. Emma examining shells like they were precious jewels. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, they sat on the sand together. Emma leaned against Miles's chest, tired and happy, and Miles wrapped his arms around her. Daddy? Yeah? Is Mommy watching us right now? Miles looked up at the vast sky, at the endless ocean, at the beauty that surrounded them. I think so. I think she sees everything. Do you think she's happy? Miles thought about the letter, about Lena's words telling him to live, to love, to let go of guilt and embrace joy. He thought about the gift she'd left them, about the lives they'd already touched, about the future that stretched out before them like the ocean, vast and full of possibility. Yeah, Emma. I think she's very happy. They stayed until the stars came out, until Emma was fighting sleep, her head heavy against Miles's shoulder. On the drive home, she fell asleep in the back seat, and Miles drove through the darkness with a peace he hadn't felt in years. When they got home, he carried Emma upstairs, tucked her into bed still in her sandy clothes, and kissed her forehead. Then he walked to the living room, picked up Lena's photo, and sat with it in the quiet. I'm doing it, he whispered. I'm living. I'm helping people. I'm giving Emma everything we dreamed about. The photo didn't answer, but Miles didn't need it to. He could feel Lena's presence in the choices he was making, in the kindness he was showing, in the way he was raising their daughter to see abundance not as something to hoard, but something to share. Over the following weeks, things continued to change. The building purchase went through, and Miles became a landlord who actually cared about his tenants. He fixed the broken elevator, replaced the ancient water heaters, hired a maintenance crew to address years of deferred repairs. Rent stayed the same, and when people fell behind, Miles worked with them instead of threatening them. He set up a meeting with Jonathan and Patricia Westbrook, and together they began laying the groundwork for the foundation. They called it Lena's Legacy, and its mission was simple: prevent families from falling through the cracks. Emergency assistance, no strings attached, based on need rather than worthiness. Marcus, the boy Lena had saved, became an unexpected part of their lives. He visited twice, spending time with Emma, telling her stories about the donor who'd saved him, making sure she knew what her mother had done. The two families grew close, bound together by grief and gratitude, and the determination to honor a woman who'd asked for nothing but given everything. Rachel visited as promised, and then visited again. And soon she was a regular presence in their lives, taking Emma for weekends, helping Miles navigate his new reality, rebuilding the relationship they'd lost when grief had driven them apart. Miles went back to school, enrolling in business classes so he could better manage the foundation and the building. It was hard, studying after Emma went to bed, balancing everything. But it was the good kind of hard, the kind that built something rather than just surviving. 3 months after that first day at the bank, Miles stood in front of a small crowd at a community center. They'd organized an event to announce the foundation, to explain how people could apply for assistance, to let the neighborhood know that help was available. Harold was there, and the Westbrooks, and half the residents from Miles's building. Emma sat in the front row next to Mrs. Chen, swinging her legs and beaming with pride. Miles approached the microphone, his hands shaking slightly, and looked out at the faces watching him. 6 months ago, I was standing in line at a food bank with my daughter, trying to figure out how we were going to eat that week. I was 2 days away from being evicted. I was broken, exhausted, and certain that we were going to end up on the streets. He paused, steadying himself. Then I found out about a gift my late wife had left us. A gift that came from the most Lena thing she ever did, saving a stranger's life without asking for anything in return. That gift changed everything. It gave us security. It gave us hope. It gave us the chance to breathe. Miles saw Emma watching him, her small face serious and attentive. But the thing about gifts like that is they're not meant to be hoarded. My wife didn't save someone's life so I could sit on a pile of money. She did it because she believed in helping people, in making the world a little less cruel, in choosing kindness, even when it cost her something. His voice grew stronger. So we're starting Lena's Legacy Foundation to honor that belief. We're going to help families before they reach the breaking point. We're going to pay the rent that keeps someone housed, cover the medical bills that would bankrupt them, fix the car that gets them to work. We're going to see people who feel invisible and tell them they matter. Applause started, tentative at first, then building. Miles waited for it to quiet. If you're struggling, if you're scared, if you're choosing between impossible options, reach out. We're here, and we're not going anywhere. After the event, people lined up to shake his hand, to thank him, to share their own stories of struggle and need. Miles listened to every single one, making mental notes, promising to help, meaning every word. When the crowd finally cleared, Marcus Westbrook approached with his parents. The teenager looked uncertain, shuffling his feet, but then he stepped forward and pulled Miles into a hug. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, "for keeping her memory alive." Miles hugged him back. This boy his wife had saved, this living testament to her kindness. "Thank you for being here, for being okay. She would have loved knowing you." That night, after Emma was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Miles sat at the kitchen table with Lena's letter spread in front of him. He'd read it so many times the paper was soft, the creases deep, but the words never lost their power. "Now go live." Miles picked up a pen in his notebook and he started writing. Not plans this time, but a letter of his own. "Dear Lena," he wrote, "I don't know if you can read this, if heaven has mailboxes, or if thoughts somehow reach across the distance between us. But I need you to know. I'm doing it. I'm living. Emma's thriving. She's happy, healthy, loved. She talks about you every day, and I make sure she knows who you were, what you meant, how much you loved her. I bought the building. Can you believe that? The place that almost destroyed us is now ours, and I'm using it to help people the way we needed help. The foundation is real. Lena's legacy. We're going to help so many families, prevent so much suffering. Your gift isn't just sitting in an account somewhere. It's out in the world, doing good, multiplying the kindness you started. I'm not drowning anymore. I'm not just surviving. I'm actually living, just like you told me to. I miss you. God, I miss you every single day. But I'm not letting that grief bury me anymore. I'm letting it fuel me, drive me, remind me of what matters. Thank you for everything, for loving me, for Emma, for saving Marcus and setting all of this in motion, for believing I could be the man you saw in me. I promise I'll keep going. I'll keep helping people. I'll keep raising Emma to be kind and brave and to stand up for others. I'll keep your memory alive, not through grief, but through action. I love you. I will always love you, but I'm going to be okay now. We're going to be okay.
Miles. He folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others he'd written to her over the months. Letters he never sent, words she'd never read, but writing them helped him process, helped him heal, helped him feel connected to her even in her absence. Miles stood and walked to the window one last time, looking out at the city that had once seemed so cruel, so indifferent to his suffering. It looked different now, warmer, full of possibility. He pressed his palm against the glass, feeling the cool surface, and smiled. Tomorrow, they'd help another family. Tomorrow, Emma would go to her first swimming lesson at the community center, something she'd been begging for that they finally could afford. Tomorrow, life would continue, full and rich and purposeful. But tonight, Miles Rayner allowed himself to simply be grateful. Grateful for the gift. Grateful for the second chance. Grateful for the woman who'd loved him enough to ensure that even in death, she was still taking care of them. He picked up Lena's photo one last time, traced her smile with his finger, and whispered the words that had become his mantra, his promise, his truth. I won't let you down. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he wouldn't.